I'm really glad that we're closing out tonight with Andy Weir and Artemis, because it's a book that looks so hopefully beyond the present to the future of the human race. When I first learned that Andy Weir was publishing a new novel and that it was going to be a lunar heist thriller, I was over the moon. Sorry, it's the last dad joke you'll get tonight. I'm sure that everyone in this room has read The Martian and knows about the story's extraordinary journey from a self-published novel in 2011 to its huge re-release in 2014 by Crown. If you're like me, you were entranced by a sci-fi story that struck a perfect balance between unapologetically thorough science and gripping fiction. And to me, the first aspect, the science, defined how the story progressed in a way that totally reinvigorated the sci-fi genre. For an author, asking, what do you do next must be a challenge when your debut has sold 3 million copies and been adapted into a film named by the President Obama as among the best science fiction movies he's ever seen. Happily, Artemis rises to those expectations and exceeds them. Andy Weir's vision of a city on the moon is convincing at every turn, down to the most intricate details. I really just wanted to give it to Elon Musk and tell him he's got all the blueprints you need. No further R&D necessary. But for me, it's also human life that drives this book, and the protagonist, Jazz, is a fun companion to bounce around with in a moonscape full of characters who are mostly just trying to get by, like the rest of us. We're fortunate also to have someone else with us tonight who really knows their science. Eliza Barclay will be in conversation with Andy Weir, and she's the Science, Health and Environment Editor for Vox.com. Her journalistic background is an impressive who's who of media outlets that the president would describe as failing. She has covered similar scientific topics for NPR, and she edited their food blog, The Salt. And she's also contributed to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, and Slate, to name just a few. I can't wait to see where tonight's discussion will lead. And I can only hope that one day, decades from now, people will see this as a historic novel, reading this from their lunar city, and say, wow, Andy Weir nailed it. Right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for very kind introductions. It is such a pleasure to be here with Andy this evening.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So I want to start talking a little bit about your characters, and specifically, it really struck me that Mark Watney and Jazz Bashara, who is the main character of Artemis, have a pretty similar voice.
Surprise! It's not because I lack any sort of originality.
And so, they're both plucky, they're both insouciant, they're very chatty, and so I had to wonder, are they people that you would want to be in conversation with? Are they kind of like your ideal conversation partner, or is this more of like your internal voice that we're reading?
Oh, they're me. Oh yeah, for sure. Mark Watney is really based on the idealized version of me. He's all the like qualities I have that I like about myself, and none of my flaws, none of my many flaws. Right? So he's what I wish I were. Jazz is a little bit more what I am. She's flawed. She's really. Jazz is 26, and she's about as flawed in the same ways as I was when I was in my 20s. I was a real screw-up. I wasn't living...
But a criminal, were you?
I was not a criminal, but I was a screw-up in all the other ways. Like, I wasn't remotely living up to my potential. I wasn't willing to do the work that I needed to do to make my life better. I made kind of bad decisions in every area, from love life to, economics to everything. And so Jazz is more based on the real me, because I've said, I want a flawed main character. Here are some flaws I know really well. And, before we go on, somewhere in the audience, I'm told, is a guy I know named Ari. Where are you? There you are. We're from Boston, right? Yeah, that was awesome. We have a friend in common named Mary, and when I first moved to Boston, Mary and her husband came out to bring my cats. And they brought my cats, and we went to Boston to visit her friend Ari, and it was like 1,000,000 degrees outside. It was like one of the hottest days ever. I'm like, oh my God, what have I gotten into? I've come to Boston where it's hot. And we went all around, and then Mary got sick because it was so hot. Anyway, hi, Ari. Anyway, moving on.
So I'm curious, so Jazz, you drew a lot from your own personal experience to build her, but she obviously is quite different than you. She has a very different background. She's from Saudi Arabia. She has that background. What was fun about building her? What was the most fun about constructing Jazz?
I mean, I guess I liked her coming up with the blue-collar opportunity backstory. Basically, her father emigrated to Artemis, so they're similar to like first-generation immigrant families to the U.S. in the 19th century, right? Is that you've got the dad from the parents have the culture of the old country, the kids have the culture of the new place. And her dad did everything he could to give her all the opportunities she needed. Right? She's been there since she was 6 years old. He taught her a trade skill, his skill, welding. He had it in mind that she would take over his shop, and she pisses that away, basically. She is, like I said, a very flawed character. In fact, I kind of ride the jagged edge to the point where, like, I'm in danger of alienating the reader, where the reader's like, why should I root for this asshole?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to root for the main character, and if you're not wishing the best for the main character, then you're not going to enjoy a novel. You have to be rooting, you have to put yourself into the mind and shoes of the protagonist. So what I was hoping to do is, we all have flaws, we're all screw-ups in different ways, and I wanted people to see that in themselves and see how Jazz overcomes that stuff. And also, while she is a criminal and a smuggler and a screw-up in a lot of ways, she also has a very strong moral center of kind of code of ethics and conduct that she will not violate. And you later find out a lot of what she's motivated by is trying to make up for mistakes of the past.
And she also just has an incredible array of technical skills, too.
Oh, well, she's a genius. She's literally a genius, genius-level intelligence, and she grudgingly uses it when she has to. She's like, oh, all right, I'll spend a few hours and learn how to do electronics, which she does. But yeah, she's lazy.
Do you think of Mark also as a genius?
He's very technically skilled. I would say, like, in terms of raw intelligence, though, Jazz is smarter than Mark, more intelligent. It's just Mark is more driven and more directed and has better self-discipline.
That's fascinating. Okay, I want to talk about how you research your books. I mean, your process is absolutely fascinating to me. You literally had to build Artemis. Like, there's nothing like Artemis that exists. How did you do it? Did you use architectural models? Like, talk us through your process for building.
Sure. I actually designed and like the whole city before I came up with characters or a plot, because I wanted to make a story about humanity's first city that wasn't on Earth. After some quick research, it was clear to me that that would be on the moon. If you build it in low Earth orbit, you don't have any local materials to work with. If you build it on Mars, you're dealing with something that's ludicrously far away compared to the moon. For reference, if you were on a football field, if you were on one goal line and Mars was at the other goal line, the moon would be 4 inches in front of you. So the moon is much closer and much easier. And it's close enough for regular travel, tourism, and trade. Okay, so it's on the moon. Great, now what? All right, well, I want to build it out of local materials. A city is heavy. You don't want to ship that over to the moon from Earth. So what's available? Did some research, mostly from data collected by the Apollo missions, actually. Found out that in the lunar highlands, which is the kind of bumpy parts of the moon, as opposed to the smooth parts, those bumpy parts are the lunar highlands, and 85% of the rocks just out on the surface are a mineral called anorthite. Okay, why does that matter? Well, anorthite is made of aluminum, calcium, silicon, and oxygen. That's what the mineral is. And if you take them apart, if you smelt it and take it apart into its base elements, then you have aluminum to build your moon base and oxygen to fill it. So it's like the moon is trying as hard as it can to invite us. You know, it's like the moon is made of moon bases with just some assembly required. I'm like, okay, but I definitely want my moon base to be close to the Apollo 11 landing site, because that's a tourist destination.
Right.
And so I found the balance point. There's this one spot near a crater called Moltke. So the area of the highlands, I named them the Moltke foothills. And it's like a kilometer or two from there and about 40 kilometers, when they built a rail line, 40 kilometers from the Apollo 11 landing site. So that's the location, great. Okay, I want to smelt anorthite. Okay, let's do some back of the napkin math and figure out how much energy that's going to take. Oh my God. It takes so much energy to pull anorthite molecules apart. They are very, very happy being anorthite. And so you need to dump ludicrous amounts of energy into this. And so I'm like, all right, well, how much would that take in how big a solar farm would you need to do that? Well, the answer is you'd need a solar farm so big, it'd be better just to ship the aluminum to the moon from Earth. So I'm like, that means nuclear reactors. Okay, how small are nuclear reactors? What is the lightest nuclear reactors I can send? Okay, well, I did a bunch of research. I'm like, well, nuclear submarines have small reactors, right? I mean, so I don't know how many watch lists I'm on now, but I looked into all that. But the main thing about Artemis that I had to work out before I did all of that was I had to work out its economy. I'm like, a city doesn't exist without an economic reason. No city exists without an economic reason. So I decided it's the tourist industry, and the main conceit of the whole book is that the price to low Earth orbit has been driven down enough that humans can afford to, that middle-class people can afford to go into space. It's expensive, but it's within economic reach for them. Once you do that, then it starts to become viable to go to the moon as well, because the hardest part about going to the moon is getting off of Earth. And so that's the conceit. And then I also figured out how much it costs in 2015 dollars, which is when I started all this research, to go to the moon, all the way down to it costs $162 per kilogram of cargo that you want to transport to the surface of the moon. And then I based everything else on that. It's like, okay, you want to put a 15 metric ton nuclear reactor on the moon? That's going to run you about $5 million. But that's within reach of somebody who's building a resort.
And I understand that you actually were using Caribbean islands as economic models because they are tourism-based for Artemis. Which ones?
Well, I don't remember. I looked up a bunch of them, but I just looked at the cities themselves and kind of the population and the demographics and stuff. When you have a small city that has a single source income, which is basically tourism, then you end up with really nice hotels and casinos and stuff, and then much more modest living conditions for the people who live and work there. And that's what Artemis is, because that's just the emergent behavior of that economy.
That's cool.
It's on the moon, so it's a little different. But
and how long were you researching it before you started to work on the narrative part?
Well, on and off, probably a little over a year. But it should be noted that between The Martian and Artemis, I was working on a different book, which was called Zhek, Z-H-E-K, and it was a space opera book with aliens and faster-than-light travel and telepaths and stuff like that. And I got 70,000 words into it. For reference, The Martian is about 100,000 words. And it sucked. There's no other word for it. I'm just like, this isn't working. It's not working, and I can't figure out how to fix it. And so I asked Crown, my publisher, I asked them, look, I just don't think this is working. I hate to do this, but I want to push the big red reset button and write a completely different story, and I need you to extend my deadline by a year. And they said, okay. Because they'd been reading the chapters, and they also knew it sucked. And I'm so glad that we did that. It hurt to just put that on a back burner and then turn off the burner, but it hurt because it was so much work that I was just putting away. But it was the right call, and Artemis is so much better than Jack would have been, so I'm happy about that. The result was nice. The process was painful.
And so, of course, the Martian was self-published, and you went through a very different process to write Artemis. You were working with editors, presumably. Do you miss anything about the self-publishing process and the independence you had then?
Well, I don't. I don't miss the full independence of the self-publishing process. That was never a big thing to me. But what I do miss was when I was writing The Martian, I would post a chapter, I'd email it out to my mailing list, and then I'd get a couple of hundred emails that next day going, hey, great, awesome chapter, I'm still along with it. It was just this huge amount of encouragement. And of course, I couldn't do that with Artemis. I'm just like, I'd send it to my editor and my agent, and like, here's the latest chapter I wrote, and they're like, here's what's wrong with it.
Do you think in the future you'd ever go back to the model of publishing, getting feedback chapter by chapter from your fans, who I'm sure would love to continue to provide feedback?
I'm sure they would. The problem is I would never be able to do that and have a traditional publishing contract, because when a publisher gives you a bunch of money for a book, they don't want you to post it online for free. And I really like the traditional publishing model because their marketing and publicity engines can't be beat. Their ability to get books into bookstores all over the country on shelves, placement arrangements, which means like, oh, every Target store in America is going to carry the book, and they're going to put it in a special kiosk up front. These sorts of things you can't do on your own. This is what they're an expert at, and that's why I love them. I'm sure I wouldn't have sold anywhere near as many copies of The Martian if it weren't for Crown's publicity and marketing teams.
But the story behind it, that it was self-published, was obviously a great part of it, too.
That's fun, yeah.
I know that your fans also provided a sort of fact-checking service, right?
That's true.
And how did that work this time around?
I was on my own. I probably screwed up a bunch of stuff. Well, I had to be more thorough also. With The Martian, I didn't have to like quadruple check everything because I'm like, if I'm wrong, someone will tell me. But for Artemis, I'm like, well, if I'm wrong, someone will tell me after it's on shelves, and that's not as good. Most of the science in there, I feel pretty confident about. I was very careful. However, like there's a bizarrely large amount of welding in the story, and like, I started by, to give you an idea of how much I already knew about welding, I started by going to Wikipedia and typing welding. And so that began my research process on that. So I didn't know anything at all. So I am a little nervous about that because it's like a scientific discipline / trade skill that I knew literally zero about. And I can only hope that I got the stuff right. And also, I contacted welders. Welders in my area. This sounds like a thing you'd see in an ad on the internet. Welders in your area? What? No, but I contacted welders in my area, saying like, hey, I'm an author of a book. Actually, I'm the author of The Martian. And if you'd like, I was wondering if we could talk about welding, because none of them replied.
No way.
Yeah, I guess they're busy welding. But I couldn't, so I didn't have any experts to talk to, unfortunately.
I'm curious about, at what point did you reach any limits in the available science on the moon, about what we know about the moon, and where you sort of had to then make a leap into making things up? Were there any particular limits in terms of what we ended up getting in the book?
In the grand scheme, no, not really, because the amount, we know so much about the moon. In fact, most people, I think it's safe to say we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the floor of the ocean.
That's amazing.
And that's kind of a lot of scientists have pointed that out. Well, it's a lot easier to see the surface of the moon. But so I didn't run into problems where like humanity has not discovered the answer to this question. But there was one little thing. One little itty-bitty thing. I had to decide, since the Apollo 11 landing site is a tourist attraction in Artemis, and you can go there to the Apollo 11 Visitors Center, and you can buy little, lunar landers, and you can look out through these big, thick glass windows onto the site, and then you're in pressure, you don't have to be in a spacesuit or anything. I had to decide whether or not the American flag was still standing. And we don't really know, because so when Armstrong and Aldrin went out, they planted the flag 20 feet from the lander, and then when they took off, the exhaust of the lander knocked the crap out of it. And you can see it when you watch the ascent camera. If you dig up that footage on YouTube or whatever, you can see they had a downward-facing camera when they lifted off, and you can see the flag's like, it really got hit hard. And so there's much speculation on whether or not that flag is still standing. Also, any flag that is still standing is now completely white on the moon because all the red and blue would have been bleached out by 50 years of unfiltered sunlight hitting it. But, so I decided that the US flag at the Apollo 11 site had been knocked over and then covered in dust from the launch. So the parts of it that aren't covered in dust are white because it's been bleached, but presumably under the dust, it still has the original colors, but they're not willing to go touch it because the whole site is cordoned off and they don't want to mess with it. So that's like one thing that is unknown, but really the moon is very well known.
And it's all publicly accessible information. You didn't have to talk to NASA moon people.
And that's funny because like I now have all these contacts all over the space industry. I mean, I was at NASA HQ today, and it was like I was a rock star. Everybody's coming up asking for my autograph. I was like, yeah. I can ask any of these people anything I want, and they'll get back to me, and they'll return my emails. I can ask scientists, I can ask all this, but Google is faster. It's just, I can get it faster. And the thing is, the space industry is space technology is one of the easiest things to research because first off, the people who work on it are tech savvy, so they know how to post it online. Second off, they're very proud of it. People who work in the space industry are very proud of their contributions to the industry. And third off, there's very little in the way of industrial or military secrets. It's all very open. So it's actually very easy to find the answers to whatever your question is online, and it's faster than emailing an expert.
That's amazing. So I want to talk about space travel and colonizing space. You really are one of the world's top experts on this now.
I'm one of the world's top enthusiasts.
As I'm sure you know, Stephen Hawking earlier this year set a deadline for humanity to save itself from climate change and other environmental crises. And he says, within the next 100 years, we need to colonize Mars and other planets. He's not the only person who said this. Elon Musk and Richard Branson have also been talking about this, like that the environmental pressures on Earth are so severe, we need to start thinking about colonizing other planets. What is your take on this?
Well, I hate to put myself in a position like this, but I disagree with all of those geniuses. There's a saying in the space community, which is, there is no planet B, okay?
Right.
So, and I guarantee you, whatever environmental problems we have and whatever environmental problems we create going forward, it is easier to fix them than it is to colonize another planet. Like, so much easier. And colonizing the moon or Mars or something like that will not reduce the population pressure on Earth significantly at all in terms of our effect on the environment. So I don't see environmental problems as being tied to space exploration at all. They're unrelated entities. It's like saying, okay, what is the connection between space exploration and malaria? It's like, well, nothing. But malaria is a very serious problem, one of the biggest problems we have, but it's not affected by space exploration.
And I know that after Stephen Hawking said this, a lot of climate scientists, they were very upset for this same reason, and also feel like this could potentially be, a distraction from the real work we need to do on climate change. And they've also talked about how if we start focusing on colonizing other planets, we may not make the necessary investments. Do you see that a relationship there and kind of investing in space travel and that pulling money away potentially from investing in climate technologies or carbon mitigation technologies?
I don't think so. I don't see those as coming from the same bucket. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, the $20 billion NASA budget. It's not like they're going to say like, well, that's $20 billion. We're not going to put toward climate research. It's you know what I mean? So my opinion, well, now we're getting into things like national budgeting, and I don't claim to be any sort of expert on it, but I don't feel like they're linked.
So if we think then we focus on space adventure travel, let's say, give us a sense of what might unfold in the next couple decades. Like what can we expect for adventure travel to the moon or elsewhere?
Well, it all comes down to the price to low Earth orbit. Right now, a Falcon 9 is the cheapest way to get to low Earth orbit, aside from things that are government subsidized. So, and it ends up costing about over $4,000 per kilogram. You need to get that price considerably further down. But if you can work that out, and that's what companies like SpaceX and less flamboyantly Orbital ATK and Aristide and Boeing and stuff like that are working on, they're trying to drive the price down because they know if the price ever gets low enough that middle-class people can afford to go into space, there's going to be a space boom. There's going to be a brand new multi-trillion-dollar industry in the world that's never going to go away. It's kind of like the tech boom of the 90s. It's just, boom, here is a new product that literally everybody wants and is going to be around forever. It's not a phase, you know? It's not a phase, Mom. Okay. And so it's worth it to sink money into it, to research that, to figure it out, if you think your company is going to be at the forefront when that boom happens. And so it's almost, I don't know if you've ever seen like Olympic bicycling. Mm-hmm. Olympic bicycle races are like the short track bicycle races. They'll be like one-on-one race. There'll be two people, and they'll both ride, and they'll both go kind of slowly around the track, and they'll just pay attention to each other. And then at some point during the race, one of them will just start going all out, and then the other one will go to catch up. So they're both doing this to conserve energy. It's kind of some weird it's this weird effective game theory of like, well, it's not, if I waste all my energy right now, my opponent will just, you know, kick back and let me run out of steam, and then he'll catch up and he'll win. So the same is true for the space industry. Everybody, all these companies are going like, at some point we're going to hit that magical point, and we want to be just cresting on our technology when that happens.
What's your best guess for when that's going to happen?
I think it's going to take another 20 to 30 years before we drive the price to low Earth orbit down far enough that folks like us can afford it. Well, hell, I'm rich, but folks like you can afford it.
And
I bought a whole house with my Martian money. It's awesome.
Have you talked to anybody at these companies about building an Artemis, like a tourist?
No.
Is anyone there besides you in terms of gaming that up?
I don't know, but I'm hardly the first person to think of stuff like this, right? I mean, I didn't invent any of these concepts. I had a lot of fun solving the minutia and the details of building Artemis, but lots and lots and lots of people have noted this thing that I just talked about, and there are a whole bunch of people way smarter than me working on it, so.
I feel like you're likely to become a consultant, though.
A consultant? I'm an entertainer. That's all. I'm a speculator.
So you've actually testified before Congress, though, about Mars. And
That's
since
true.
This is Washington. We want to hear all about your congressional testimony. What did you say?
Yeah, it was the Committee on Space and like 15 other words. It was
Technology, maybe.
Yeah, right. Space technology and I don't know, whatever. But that was interesting because there were like a bunch of industry experts from places like Orbital ATK, you know, and then there's like, and Andy Weir, who wrote a book. Andy Weir's credentials include his high school diploma. Yeah, and so I'm like, okay, so these guys are experts, I'm an enthusiast, so let's be clear that I'm not an expert. But they did ask, what should we be working on right now? And lots of people had lots of answers, and my answer was, this was during the previous administration when the primary goal was putting people on Mars. And I said, if we want to put people on Mars, our number one goal should be working on centripetal gravity. So making a space station that rotates to provide artificial gravity in a ring. This doesn't require, what it is it's a matter of engineering and materials technology. There's nothing, you don't need to invent any new concepts for it. You just need to do it. And because my argument is, if you spend 8 months in 0G, when you come out when you land on the moon and step out, you're just going to fall over. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen them bringing people back, pulling astronauts out of a Soyuz capsule after they've been at the ISS for a year, but they have to be picked up and carried out and put in basically a sedan chair and hauled off. Like, they can't even walk. So it's ridiculous to assume that some fitness program aboard the ship could keep them better. And also it wastes a lot of research time that we could spend actually doing zero-G research. So instead, make a ring that spins around and have a central hub that's zero-G. Do your zero-G stuff there and live in here. That's what I testified.
So if Richard Branson invited you to go to space on Virgin Galactic, would you go?
No. For a couple reasons. First off, I don't want to go into space. I write about brave people. I'm not one of them. Second off, I don't really consider Virgin Galactic's flights to be space. They go really, really high up, but if you're still encountering aerodynamic flight, you're not in space. And the the altitude that like Spaceship Two or something like that achieves is lower than the cruising altitude of an SR-71. So to me, that's not space. Or if it is, an SR-71 is a spaceship.
If you get other invitations later in life to actually go to space, will you go?
No, I don't even like flying. And that's really safe, right? I mean, it's a phobia, and phobias are by definition irrational. But no, I mean, if somebody said like, hey, we'll give you a ticket so you can go into space, I'd be like, can I sell the ticket?
Okay, one last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Just a question I love to hear writers answer. When you read fiction, what are you looking for in a great novel?
Well, what's funny is it used to be, like before I became a writer, it used to be like just, I want the plot to pull me along. I don't want to get bored at any point. I don't like exposition. Just the same things most readers are looking for. Now, I'm hyper-analyzing the narrative style of every writer I read because I'm like, I want to get better. I want to see what they're doing that I like. And so unfortunately, it's become this very clinical thing for me. But I do get to still enjoy books, but there's still this process in the back of my mind going, all right, what is Lee Child doing that I like so much, That's
great. Okay, we will do questions. Yes?
Any prospects for a movie for Artemis yet? Yes, 20th Century Fox has bought the film rights. Not optioned, bought. Which means that it's a larger commitment on their part. They've lined up the directing duo of Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and so they're attached, and those two are now selecting a screenwriter to make the adaptation. That's where it is right now. They seem pretty excited about it, but with Hollywood, you never know. Everybody's excited about everything. A lot of things have to go right for a movie to be greenlighted. And although no one, when you're the writer of the original work, you're just sort of an excited spectator, like peeking in through the window. You're not an insider. But my guess is they're probably going to wait to see how well the book sells. So, if you want that movie made, go buy books.
Just a guess. Do you think that an Artemis movie would be more expensive to make than The Martian?
That's a tough call. I guess it comes down to how big are the stars that you put in it. That's going to be a large part of it. In terms of the effects budget, I think it would be about the same.
Yep.
Okay, and my first answer is yes. I mean, I have thought about writing fiction, mainstream fiction. I really like crime stories. I like, whodunits and heist stories and stuff like that. And this was sort of my kind of like get everything I wanted. Whereas like I am known for writing science fiction. I have a science fiction audience. I like writing science fiction, but I also like crime stories. So this is a science fiction crime story. But if somebody put a gun to my head for a year and said like, hey, write a book that is not science fiction, I would write a crime novel. Basically, earlier in life, in my 20s, I had gotten laid off from America Online when they merged with Netscape. Just to give you a date reference. Cast your mind back. The Macarena was popular. Anyway, I got a bunch of money from my AOL stock options because I had to sell them or lose them. So I ended up with enough money I realized I could live for several years without working. And so I took that opportunity to try to get into writing. And I wrote a book, and you've never seen that book because it wasn't very good, and I couldn't get an agent or a publisher. It's kind of the standard tale of woe that every author has. After that, I decided, well, I'm going back into the engineering world. I was a computer programmer for 25 years, by the way. I'm going back into the software engineering world, and this is not a sad Charlie Brown music, hang your head moment. I like computer programming. But then writing was going to be my hobby. And so this newfangled internet thing was coming around, and so I started just kind of writing things and posting them to my website. I slowly, very slowly, over the course of 10 years, accumulated about 3,000 people on my mailing list. 3,000 people sounds like a lot. 10 years is also a lot. And I started saying, like, I want to try my hand at serials. So I started writing 3 different serials. Well, 4 if you count some Sherlock Holmes fan fiction. And one of the serials was The Martian, but that started to get really good feedback. So I wrote that, and I finished it, and that took 3 years, by the way, so I'm kind of skipping over a bit there. And then people started emailing me and saying, like, hey, I love The Martian, but I hate your website, which is fair. My website is crap. And they said, like, can you make an e-reader version? And I'm like, oh, sure. Okay, so I made an e-reader version, posted it on the site. I'm like, there you go. Then other people emailed, and they said, like, oh, hey, love The Martian, hate your site. I see you have an e-reader version, but I don't know how to download a thing from the internet and put it on my e-reader. Can you just post it to Amazon? I'm like, okay. So I posted it to Amazon, found out how to do that. They make you charge at least 99 cents. You're not allowed to give content away. So I'm like, okay, I'll set the price down to 99 cents, which means I pull down a cool 33 cents profit. Then Amazon hangs on to it for a couple of days without posting it so that they can have a human check it just to make sure you're not posting a bunch of goat porn or something. Don't judge. And then it goes up for sale. And I think it sold really well on Amazon. You know, it was 99 cents. I'm sure the price point was part of it. And I'm sure another part of it was that, like, a lot of my regular readers, my 3,000 or so fans, had for many years been, I would get the occasional email saying, like, hey, I want to donate. You know, I would just put a donate button up there. And I'm like, I'm a software engineer. I got a 6-figure salary. I don't need donations. You need the money more than I do. Keep it, right? Donate to cancer research or something useful. And so now my readers then saw this opportunity where they could, you know, oh, well, now I can give Andy some money. And so they would buy it even though they already read it. And so they paid 99 cents. And so that bumped it up initially in the Amazon ratings, which got more attention. And then it started to really get up, word of mouth got around, and it really became sort of a lightning in a bottle thing. I you know, kind of wish I knew what I did right, but it really started to take off, and it got into the top sellers. And once it got up to like #1 in science fiction, then an agent approached me and said, like, hey, do you have an agent? And I'm like, no. And he's kind of like, well, now you do. And then Crown approached me and said, like, hey, we're interested in talking about a potential print deal. And I'm like, well, it just so happens I have an agent. So, and then Fox came for the film rights. And so the film rights deal and the book deal were being negotiated at the same time. And they were agreed on 4 days apart. That was an eventful week for me. By the way, at the time, I'm still a computer programmer, so I'm like in my cubicle fixing bugs, and then running off to take a call about my movie deal, and then back. I had to take a day off in the middle there just to kind of lie down. But it all worked out. Where did I get my ideas when I was developing the book Artemis? Well, I started out, I just wanted to, I really just wanted to design a moon city. I mean, that was my initial thing. I'm like, city on the moon. That's all I had. But then when I was working on the book, when I had to grudgingly work into the part where I was making characters and plot, as opposed to just world building, because world building's fun. That's the best part. I wish my job could just be write Wikipedia articles about a made-up world. That would be awesome. I wish I could just write the Silmarillion, right? But once I designed Artemis, then I'm like, okay, I needed a story to take place here. And I put it all together, and I came up with, you know, a story idea. And at the time, Jazz, the main character, was actually this very tertiary character. She was, I needed a kind of smuggler type underworld person, and I needed for like 3 scenes, and that was it in my outline. And so I'm like, all right, what's a country I haven't used yet? Saudi Arabia, we'll make it a woman, done. So that's how Jazz got like created. And then after working on it for a while, I didn't like that outline. That story wasn't coming together very good. I didn't think it was good. So I said, all right, I'm going to come up with something else instead. And I came up with something else. I took elements from the first outline that I liked and ditched stuff that I didn't like, made different characters, everything like that. And in the second rev, Jazz was a little more prominent. She was still very much a secondary character, but I had to fill her out a little bit, define her a little bit of her backstory, you know, that she's grown up in Artemis and that her father was an immigrant there and so on. But that story also didn't really work out. However, I realized, Jazz is interesting. This character is interesting, and I like crime novels. So what if I wrote a story about her and her life? And so this is how I ended up with Jazz as the central character. And by the time I got to this point, she was so cemented in my mind as a Saudi woman, my imagination would have rebelled if I tried to change her into something I'm more comfortable with, like a man. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to write a first-person narration with a Saudi female narrator. Let's see how that goes.
Very non-traditional Saudi woman, though.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, she's so her Saudi heritage wasn't that big a deal. That was easy for me because she's Artemisian, and that's a culture that I invented. So by definition, her morals and beliefs are correct because I defined the culture that she grew up in. But men and women view the world differently. I've never been a woman, you know. Well, there was that one time. No, but. No, I've never been a woman. I don't know what it's like to be a part of the world as a woman. This takes place in a world where there's, in a society where there's functionally no sexism or racism, but still, women are different than men. And I was really nervous about that. Like, I can do orbital dynamics, but trying to understand how women think is a totally much more complicated thing for me. So, all I could do is go back to my standby of subject matter experts. So I gave the manuscript to all the women in my kind of circle of trust, people that I could trust not to just throw it up on the Pirate Bay, and took their feedback and made changes as needed.
There were two questions over here in the way back.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm supposed to say congratulations from everybody at MobileIron.
Oh, hey! I used to work with this guy in California. Well, he worked remotely.
Actually, I remember that week that you had.
Yeah. That's right, the whole company, everyone knew this was going on. Like, I was talking to everybody about it, and everybody had my back. Everybody's like, go, Andy. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't. I'm extremely risk averse with my personal finances, so I wasn't willing to leave my job until I was certain that I would be making enough money off writing, and I didn't have any concept of like, oh, how well is the Martian selling? And they said, well, it's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm like, but how much is that? Like, I don't know. I mean, for all I know, I sold 4 books and everyone else sold 3, right? I don't know. Can I live off of this? I don't know. And so I didn't leave MobileIron until I had a contract for another book. So I got a contract in advance for what was at the time Jacques and eventually got turned into Artemis. And then I was like, okay, now I got to work full time on this, so I'm going to quit my job. But I also really liked working at MobileIron. I liked the environment. I miss having coworkers. I miss going into the office in the morning, having coffee with a few people, having teammates, and you're all collectively working on a problem, trying to solve it together. I miss that. Well, that's funny because I grew up reading my father's science fiction collection, and so even though I'm 45 years old, I was born in 1972, I grew up reading like baby boomer era sci-fi. So my holy trinity are Asimov, Clarke, and Heinlein. And that was my dad's inexhaustible sci-fi collection. And so, yeah, and I wasn't even that interested in the science fiction that was contemporary to when I was reading it. So I didn't really read a lot of science fiction that was written and released in the 80s and 90s. I was still focused on the juveniles and the old school stuff. Yeah, well, so just to be clear on the various failures, first there was Jacques, which was a completely unrelated story, and I shelved that. Then there were 2 rejected plot flow ideas for Artemis, and then there's this. Okay, so you're talking about the first and second? Yeah, right. Yes, some of those are workable, but I'm keeping them to myself because I may want to use them in the future. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. My long-term plan is I would like to write more stories that take place in this setting. I'd like it to be I don't know how many fantasy readers we have out here. I'm a huge fan of Terry Pratchett. And I would love to have Artemis be my personal Discworld, where I can have Pratchett was a genius, and he would have stories that took place all over this one shared setting, for those of you who don't know. And by the time, there's about 30 books that take place on the disc, and by the time you've read them, at the end, I'm a freaking PhD expert on the disc. I can tell you everything about it. The setting seems so unbelievably solid and real to me. It's as real as if a book takes place in, like, Chicago, And so I would love to be able to get away with that with Artemis. Now, I'm not Terry Pratchett, but I would love to have my own sandbox. And then my second question is... I told you only get one. No, go ahead. Oh, the egg. Okay, so I wrote a short story called The Egg. It's about 1,000 words long. If you have 5 minutes, you can Google it and find it. Without giving spoilers too much, my inspiration was I wanted to find a method by which life was fair after all. And so that's kind of what The Egg is about. It turns out life actually is fair. Well, first off, I had to beat Crown over the head repeatedly to make that version happen. I was getting email from teachers all over the country, all over the English-speaking world, actually saying, I would love to use The Martian as a teaching aid, but there's so much profanity in it, like, I can't. And so I had talked to Random House, or Crown, which is a division of Random House, and said, like, hey, let's make a classroom-friendly edition. And they're like, hey, how about not? Because it would split the sales into 2 different books, and that would, instead of having a book that's number 2 on the bestseller list, we'd end up with 2 books that are number 13 and number 27 or something. And so they're like, but once the sales curve calms down, then yes. And so once it calmed down, yes, they did. And I personally made all the edits. So the classroom edition, all those changes were made by me. And what's funny is they had a copy editor at Random House was instructed, okay, go through The Martian and highlight all the swear words. Right? And she said that was the most fun she's ever had doing copy editing. She's just like, yeah. Yeah.
There's another one over here, yeah.
Oh, one of the fun problems. Well, I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to give away spoilers, but at the end, there is, the best way I can put it, at the end of the book, there is an unexpected chemical reaction that causes a lot of problems. And that was really fun to set up for and execute. So I don't know if you've read it yet, but okay, there you go. No. Well, it's a PG movie, come on. It's got 2 F-bombs and 1 shit. Serious, that's the whole movie. Oh. Well, I mean, eventually it'll probably be on a TV station somewhere, and you could tape that, I guess. But no, there's no plan to make an official release that's rated G, I guess. No, it's cool. It's great. John W. Young is the answer. He was one of the original Mercury astronauts, also one of the Gemini astronauts, and he was the commander of Apollo 16. So he walked on the moon. My favorite story he's just everything an astronaut should be. He's just like cool as a mountain lake, very ultra competent and everything like that. He's still alive today. My favorite thing on this is, they have your biomonitors. They have biomonitors on the astronauts all the time during their missions, and they can watch the heart rate, blood pressure, all this stuff like that. Now, if you look at their heart rates during a launch, it's like, oh my God, right? Everybody's, like the astronauts, if you look at like Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, their heart rates go up to like 150 during the launch of an Apollo mission, and that's the case for everybody. John Young's heart rate never got above 70 during the launch. He's just like, going to space now. stage separation. I mean, the guy is like superhuman, so he's my favorite astronaut. Well, I mean, that's like a large portion of writing is like character development, and I mean, I admit I'm still very kind of weak at it. And that's like one thing I was trying to do in Artemis is make deeper and more interesting and unique characters. I tried not to make them interchangeable. That was kind of an issue with The Martian. I mean, in the movie, you can physically see what everyone looks like. In the book, a lot of people said, like, yeah, the NASA characters all kind of blended together, except Annie Montrose. But everybody else just kind of like, I don't know, it's a soup of engineers. So I tried to have a little more unique characters, like characteristics, speech affects, personalities. There's a character in there named Svoboda who's a nerdy guy, and so he's always saying weird kind of stuff. He's a little bit on the spectrum, and I don't mean that in a humorous way. I mean, he literally is a little bit on the autism spectrum. And yeah, and so I just try to find something unique in their speech patterns or behavior to distinguish them. Well, I mean, I did work on a pilot for a TV show. It was going to be called Mission Control. CBS picked it up for a pilot, but they chose not to pick it up for series. But it was pretty fun working in that process. I was in a writer's room, and so I kind of got the best of both worlds. I had coworkers, a bunch of people working together to solve a common problem, and I was writing. So I enjoyed that. So I guess, yes, I would work with other authors, although not on a book. On a TV show, yeah, but on a book, I really have to be the dictator. Oh, I love, I mean, my money comes from books, but I honestly think television or series is the best storytelling medium because you have this infinite canvas. You can, I mean, when you have something like, let's say a 13-episode Netflix season, you have 13 hours to tell your story. You can really go off into whatever directions you want, take as much time as you want. The only rule is you have to constantly be entertaining the viewer. So yeah, I would love to be involved in a series. Like I said, I was working on a pilot for a TV show that was going to be all about NASA and mission control and stuff like that. And I've got some irons in the fire now too, but I always do. So always working in all directions, trying to shamelessly take advantage of my 15 minutes of fame. Yes, but not two projects of the same type at the same time. So like, I could be working on a book and a screenplay, but I have been in situations where I was working on two screenplays at once, and that was really unpleasant. And I would never, ever try to work on two books at the same time. That guy has the correct kind of hat. Okay. Mission Control was the setting. No, slight future, modern day-ish, and the main characters were all the flight controllers in the Mission Control Center. And so the main character was the flight director, and then, you know, because all the stations have their own duties and stuff, and what I wanted it to be was basically like House meets the West Wing. You have super competent people, and then a scientific mystery of the week that they need to solve. But what it ended up kind of becoming because of network pressure and stuff was like Grey's Anatomy in space or something. It ended up, it changed so far from my original vision. It's probably just as well it didn't get picked up. Oh, no, I did not. The question is, did I want to become the lobby or want to become the screenwriter for Artemis? No, I didn't. And jokes aside, well, first off, I'm not a very experienced screenplay writer. And so I'd rather have someone who knows what they're doing do it. And second off, I think it's best for movie adaptations to be made by someone other than the person who wrote the book. Because for you, everything in the book is sacred, you know, and you try to cram everything into a 2-hour movie, and it wouldn't work, and it'd be very difficult for you to choose, you know, what goes and what stays. The only person I know of who does a really good job of making their own screenplay adaptations is Stephen King. But most other writers, I think, should steer clear of that.
One last question here.
I mean, I'm for it, I guess. I like education. Well, when I wrote The Martian, I didn't have an eye toward education. That's not what I was trying to do. Actually, in general, when I'm writing something, all I want to do is entertain the reader. I have no other objective. I have no political aims, no axe to grind. I'm not trying to change your mind or convince you of anything. I want you, when you're done with the book, to go, that was cool, and that's it. Maybe recommend it to some friends. But yeah, I mean, I think our society benefits greatly from scientists, and so I think STEM is a big deal, and that's why I'm fairly stingy with like personal events. Like I don't do these very often. I kind of have to right now because I'm on a book tour, you know. But for the most part, I'm just sort of a cave dweller. I want to stay at home. I like my house. I like my cats. I like my girlfriend. I probably should have changed the order of that, but. But yeah, I don't like going out. But the one exception I make is I will usually do things that are education related. So I do think that that's important. I guess, does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, I think we're gonna have to wrap up. Thank you all for the wonderful questions. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you for having me, everybody.